Rome did not sleep peacefully that winter night. Not because of storms, war, or famine, but because every noble household understood a silent, unspoken truth. Tonight, someone's daughter might be taken. Imagine being 14 years old, wrapped in thin linen against the cold. An oil lamp flickers beside your bed. Outside your window, the street seems calm, almost merciful. Then you hear it. The slow, deliberate clash of armored footsteps. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Footsteps that already know where they are going. In Rome, an imperial summons was called an honor. What no one told you was that honor could arrive without warning. That it could cross your threshold uninvited. That it could stand in your doorway and decide your fate without ever asking your name. A guard places a lantern outside your home. Its glass is veiled in red cloth. That color means only one thing. Your mother whispers your name as if speaking louder might anger the gods. Your father forces a smile his face can no longer hold. And in that moment, you understand the truth Rome refuses to speak aloud. The Palatine does not invite daughters. It claims them. And if you believe the nightmare begins here, you are mistaken. Because what waits inside the imperial palace will make this moment feel merciful. This was the night the Garden of Venus opened. A ritual so horrifying that Rome buried its memory beneath marble and silence. If stories like this uncover the shadows history tried to erase, subscribe to the History Veil, like this video, and share it with those who believe the past still matters. Because what you are about to hear was never meant to survive. To understand how Rome allowed such a horror to exist, you must first understand the man who created it. Caligula did not emerge from madness overnight. He was not born a monster. He was born into glory. The son of Germanicus, Rome's golden general. A man so beloved that soldiers would have followed him into death without hesitation. Caligula should have inherited honor, strength, and stability. Instead, he inherited something far more corrosive. His childhood did not unfold in gardens or academies. It unfolded on the raw edge of empire, in military camps soaked in sweat, iron, and blood. He learned to walk between ranks of legionaries, the ground trembling beneath nailed sandals. The soldiers adored the sight of the general's son wearing miniature armor. They called him Caligula, Little Boot. A name spoken in affection. A name that would one day terrify Rome. But even then, something inside the boy bent. The frontier taught him its first lesson. Power is not inherited. It is taken. And once taken, it does not ask forgiveness. That was the first fracture in his soul. The second came swiftly and violently. Germanicus died under suspicious circumstances. And overnight, Caligula became dangerous simply by existing. His mother was exiled. His brothers were imprisoned, then executed, one by one. Not by foreign enemies, but by Rome itself. By Emperor Tiberius. Then came Capri. An island Rome imagined as a peaceful retreat. In truth, it was a gilded prison sealed with paranoia and cruelty. For 6 suffocating years, Caligula lived beside the man who destroyed his family. Every smile was survival. Every bow was submission. There, he learned a second rule, darker than the first. If you wish to live, you must smile at the man you plan to destroy. He swallowed rage. He buried grief. And in the silence, something cold took root. So when Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, and the Senate lifted Caligula onto the throne, Rome erupted in celebration. A new dawn. The son of Germanicus had come to cleanse the rot. And for a moment, he did. Prisoners were freed. Taxes were cut. Spies were exposed. Gold poured into games and feasts. Rome believed it had been saved. But salvation was only the mask. Near the end of his first year, a violent illness struck Caligula down. He hovered between life and death. And when he rose from that bed, something vital did not rise with him. Standing atop the Palatine Hill, staring down at a city that worshipped him, Caligula grasped a terrible truth. At the peak of absolute power, there are no gods above you, only victims below. Sanity peeled away like dead skin. Beneath it emerged the creature Capri had shaped. Generosity twisted into mania. Justice curdled into cruelty. And in the depths of his thoughts, an idea hardened. Noble women were not daughters. Not citizens. Not human. They were instruments. And somewhere across Rome, a knock echoed through a silent home. The knock no family dared answer, but none were allowed to refuse. The poison did not fall on Rome like thunder. It crept in slowly, quietly, beneath marble floors and into patrician homes. A sickness that moved without sound, targeting those who believed themselves untouchable. It began with visits. Imperial heralds arrived without swords, without threats. They carried scrolls sealed in imperial purple. A color that meant only one thing: obedience or extinction. Inside those scrolls was a command no parent could refuse. Send your daughter. Not just any daughter. The most beautiful. The most pure. The most politically valuable. Families called it an honor. In private, they understood the truth. It was a death sentence wearing perfume. To deny the emperor was treason. To obey him was to surrender your child to something unspeakable. The girls were taken to a secluded wing of the palace. A place Caligula named with cruel irony: the Garden of Venus. When Flavia crossed its threshold, she still believed she had some measure of control. She believed this was service, ceremony, proximity to power. That illusion would not survive the night. At first glance, the garden appeared as paradise. Pink marble walls, silk-lined beds, exotic perfumes hanging heavy in the air. Servants moved silently, anticipating every need before it was spoken. The daughters of Rome stepped inside believing they had been chosen. Slowly, agonizingly, they realized the truth. Paradise was only the decoration. The prison was everything beneath it. The jewels they were forced to wear were not adornments. They were chains. Heavy gold pressed cold against the skin, marking each girl as property of the state. The silks were worse. Garments designed not to clothe, but to expose. To remind them that their bodies no longer belonged to them. The first thing Caligula erased was their names. Names meant identity. Identity meant resistance. So he replaced them with numbers. With mockeries. With humiliating nicknames whispered for his amusement. With every name stripped away, the garden tightened its grip. But the most effective weapon was not gold, silk, or fear. It was waiting. They never knew when the summons would come. Tonight. Tomorrow. Weeks from now. Every footstep in the corridor felt like an execution. Every echo of sandals made hearts rupture with terror. Sleep became impossible. Breath became shallow. By the time Caligula ever laid eyes on them, the damage was already done. They were prey softened by anticipation. And when the summons finally arrived, it did not lead to a private chamber. It led to the banquets. The young women were paraded before Rome's elite like living ornaments. Not guests. Not participants. Displays. Caligula walked among them with the calm authority of a butcher choosing meat. He commented loudly. Ranked them. Mocked their bodies. Praised one while humiliating another. But the true cruelty was not his voice. It was the silence of the men who should have protected them. Fathers. Uncles. Fiancés. Senators seated at tables of honor, forced to nod along. Any flicker of discomfort could mean death. That silence was its own execution. What followed was not chaos. It was ritual. Soft music masked screams. Movements were choreographed. Rules unspoken but absolute. This was not pleasure. It was demonstration. Caligula was not satisfying desire. He was proving ownership. Of bodies. Of souls. Flavia understood then that the emperor did not see her as human. She was a classroom where he practiced cruelty. At first, he disarmed her. Gifts. Attention. Feigned gentleness. It softened her defenses. It set the trap. When the illusion shattered, the truth struck with precision. You cannot resist a man who believes he is a god. Caligula alternated brutality with affection. Violence followed by tears. Punishment followed by rewards worth kingdoms. This was not madness. It was engineering. The mind rewired under the strain. Terror and hope fused together. The one who inflicted pain became the only source of relief. Escape became unthinkable. Then he destroyed solidarity. He ranked the girls. Rewarded obedience. Punished defiance. Turned them against one another. Survival demanded competition. Unity died. And once unity died, the emperor owned everything. When he tired of one, he did not release her. He sold her. Broken young women were offered discreetly to senators and generals. The same men who governed Rome by day. Their participation chained them to the emperor through shared guilt. Families were ordered to be grateful. Some fathers were forced to host feasts after their daughters were defiled. Toasts were raised. Smiles were performed. Gratitude became another word for despair. Surveillance tightened. Guards. Slaves. Informants. Eyes everywhere. Even a muffled sob could be reported as rebellion. By the second year, the garden no longer housed girls. It housed ghosts. Voices faded. Eyes emptied. Minds retreated inward, hiding in the only place Caligula could not reach. Doctors whispered of dissociation. Souls detaching from bodies to survive. Then the suicides began. Some slit their veins with shards of shattered vases. Some twisted silk into nooses. Others climbed balconies and stepped into silence. Death became mercy. Flavia survived. Not whole. Not free. Caught between fear of dying and exhaustion of living. Whispers spoke of 6 confirmed deaths. Everyone knew the truth. 6 was only the number the palace failed to hide. For these girls, survival was not victory. It was punishment. By the time Rome realized what was happening inside the palace, it was already too late to stop it. The Garden of Venus had become a machine. Not one driven by chaos, but by routine. By repetition. By silence. The girls who entered it no longer cried out. Crying wasted energy. Screams invited punishment. Silence was safer. Silence was survival. Caligula watched this transformation with fascination. Fear alone was not enough for him anymore. He wanted something deeper. Something permanent. So he introduced a new cruelty. He allowed parents to visit their daughters. Not to rescue them. Not to comfort them. But to watch. The girls were painted and perfumed. Silk concealed bruises. Gold distracted the eye. They were instructed to smile, to bow, to perform gratitude. Their parents were brought in under armed watch. Mothers trembled. Fathers clenched their jaws until their teeth ached. No one was allowed to break character. If a voice cracked, the parent would die. If a tear fell, the daughter would suffer. So they smiled at each other. And lied. Families pretended this was an honor. A blessing. A gift from the emperor. And Caligula observed it all like a playwright admiring his work. He had turned love itself into a weapon. Inside the garden, something finally broke. Girls stopped speaking entirely. Some no longer responded when addressed. Their eyes stared through people, through walls, through time. Roman physicians whispered a word they barely understood themselves. Dissociation. The mind retreating inward to escape what the body could not. But even that was not enough to stop the pain. The suicides continued. Some deaths were hidden. Others were staged as accidents. A fall from a balcony. A sudden illness. A tragic weakness of spirit. Rome accepted the explanations eagerly. It always did. For the survivors, death became less frightening than waking up. The idea of an ending, any ending, became a form of hope. Flavia watched this slow collapse from within. She learned how to survive by becoming smaller. Quieter. Less noticeable. She learned when to speak and when to disappear. She learned how to exist without being seen. But survival carried its own price. She began to understand something terrifying. Caligula was no longer satisfied with destroying women. He was bored. So he turned his attention outward. Power, once tasted, always demands more. Caligula began humiliating the men of Rome. Publicly. Deliberately. Strategically. Senators were forced to watch their wives and daughters be violated, then thank the emperor for the privilege. Military commanders were mocked before their troops. Honor was stripped away layer by layer. Even the Praetorian Guard, the men sworn to protect him, were not spared. He forced officers to repeat obscene passwords before being allowed to speak. He ridiculed their masculinity, their loyalty, their courage. He made them kneel. Made them beg. Made them laugh at their own degradation. Caligula believed fear guaranteed obedience. He forgot something fundamental. Fear can also harden into hatred. Among the Praetorians was a man named Cassius Chaerea. A veteran. A disciplined soldier. A man who had once served Germanicus, Caligula's own father. The emperor's mockery of him was relentless. Daily. Public. Personal. Each insult carved something deeper than anger. It carved resolve. Quietly, without speeches or banners, resentment spread. Not among politicians first, but among the men with blades. Guards spoke in fragments. Glances lingered longer than they should. Silences grew heavy. The palace was rotting from the inside. Caligula noticed none of it. He believed himself untouchable. He dressed as gods. Demanded worship. Forced senators to address him as divine. In his mind, he had already crossed the boundary separating man from deity. And gods, he believed, could not be killed. Inside the Garden of Venus, the girls sensed the change before anyone else. The guards were different. The air felt charged. Footsteps hesitated. Whispers slipped through cracks in walls. Something was coming. Flavia did not know whether to hope or to fear it. History rarely ends cleanly. It does not rescue its victims. It only changes hands. In January of 41 AD, Rome gathered for games at the Palatine. Laughter echoed. Applause thundered. The emperor basked in admiration, certain of his immortality. When the ceremonies ended, Caligula left the public halls and entered a private underground passageway. A narrow stone corridor known as the Cryptoporticus. A place where echoes swallowed sound and shadows clung to the walls. He walked alone. That was the mistake. The men were waiting. There were no speeches. No declarations. No last warnings. History does not announce itself when it turns. A blade struck his neck. Not to kill him instantly. To silence him. The man who had demanded worship tried to scream. No sound came out. Then the blades fell again. And again. And again. More than 30 wounds tore through him. Blood soaked the stone floor. The god of Rome collapsed like any other mortal. Begging. Gurgling. Dying. Caligula died where fear could not save him. But the nightmare did not end with his last breath. Inside the palace, chaos erupted. Germanic bodyguards, loyal only to the dead emperor, rampaged blindly. Servants were cut down. Officials slaughtered. Anyone unlucky enough to cross their path paid with their life. The Garden of Venus became a trap. Some girls ran barefoot through corridors slick with blood and glass. Others froze, too conditioned to move, barricading themselves in darkness, clutching each other, waiting to discover whether the next hand on the door would bring freedom or death. For hours, no one knew who ruled Rome. Then silence fell. A different silence. One not enforced by terror, but by uncertainty. And from behind a curtain, trembling and unprepared, a man was dragged into the light. Claudius. Rome had a new emperor. What Rome did next would determine whether the truth survived. When the bloodshed finally slowed, Rome stood still, unsure whether to breathe again. The monster was dead. But no one celebrated. Inside the palace, the survivors waited in silence. The young women of the Garden of Venus huddled together in dark chambers, listening for footsteps, unsure whether the world beyond the doors had changed, or simply found a new way to hurt them. Freedom, after years of terror, felt unreal. Dangerous. Almost suspicious. By morning, Rome had an emperor. Claudius. Dragged from hiding. Shaking. Unprepared. Alive only because everyone else with ambition had already been slaughtered. Claudius understood something immediately. If Rome learned what had happened inside the Garden of Venus, the empire itself might fracture. Not just because of Caligula's crimes, but because of who had enabled them. Senators. Generals. Noble families. Men who still held power. Justice would not heal Rome. Silence would. So Claudius made a decision. A clean one. A practical one. A cowardly one. There would be no trials. No investigations. No names spoken aloud. The surviving girls were returned to their families wrapped in gold. Dressed in fine fabrics. Given dowries large enough to buy obedience and forgetfulness. Every coin carried the same unspoken command. Forget. Forget what happened. Forget who did it. Forget the daughters Rome fed to a god who was never a god at all. The families complied. Rome always does. The girls returned home, but the people who came back were not the ones who had left. They moved like ghosts through familiar halls. They startled at sudden sounds. A hand on the shoulder triggered panic. Sleep brought nightmares so vivid they woke screaming. Physical captivity had ended. The prison in their minds had not. In Roman society, a noble woman's worth lived and died with her purity. And though these girls were victims, children crushed beneath a system they could not resist, the stain followed them. Most never married. Most were hidden away in distant wings of estates, rooms kept quiet, visited only by servants who left food at the door and avoided eye contact. They lived long lives. But they did not live well. Rome looked away. It blamed weakness. It blamed fate. It blamed the women. Because blaming the truth would mean confronting something far more dangerous. That Caligula was not an anomaly. He was a product. A system had built him. Fed him. Protected him. And when he revealed its darkest impulses, the system chose convenience over justice. Later historians would argue. They always do. They would question exaggerations. Debate sources. Accuse rivals of propaganda. But when accounts converge across enemies, across generations, across political lines, one thing becomes impossible to deny. A machine of abuse existed. A machine designed to satisfy one man's darkest desires. And Rome allowed it to operate in silence. This was not simply the story of a mad emperor. It was the story of an empire that concentrated legislative power, military authority, judicial control, and even divine status into the hands of a single individual. No checks. No limits. No escape. Caligula proved how thin the line truly is between civilization and savagery. Between order and chaos. Between ruler and monster. And that line was not drawn on marble or law. It was drawn on human bodies. Rome built wonders that survived millennia. Aqueducts. Roads. Law codes. Monuments still admired today. But it failed at the simplest duty of any society. To protect its most vulnerable from those at the top. The names of the girls who suffered in the Garden of Venus were erased. Deliberately. Efficiently. Their stories were folded into silence, buried beneath official histories and polished stone. But shadows have a way of surviving. They linger in the margins. In the footnotes. In the things historians are warned not to ask too loudly. And now, centuries later, those shadows belong to us. We must decide whether to look at them. Because evil does not always announce itself with fire and swords. Sometimes it wears a crown. Sometimes it speaks the language of order. Sometimes it thrives simply because too many people choose comfort over outrage. Caligula died screaming in a dark corridor. Not as a god. Not as a legend. But as a terrified man whose power vanished the moment others stopped believing in it. The system that created him, however, survived. And that is the true horror. If this story unsettled you, let it. If it angered you, let it. And if it made you question the cost of unchecked power, then the voices Rome tried to erase have finally been heard. History does not repeat itself exactly. But it rhymes. And the moment a society values silence over justice, convenience over truth, and power over dignity, the Garden of Venus is never far away.